The reboot is a concept that many have started to grow tired of in recent years, especially because it feels like many beloved franchises are being resurrected simply to take advantage of people's love for them without any care for what made the series beloved or even if it should be revived in the first place. Because let's face it, certain franchises were products of their time and simply wouldn't work in the modern era. But that being said, that doesn't mean that reboots are inherently a bad thing or that they can never work. Because when you really look at it, certain franchises that remained dormant for years not only got a new lease on life after being rebooted, but were actually pretty good at that. And today, what I'd like to do is go over a specific reboot that actually had a great concept to restart its series on and could have turned out great had its sequels not gone off the rails. And obviously there will be spoilers for the movie in question ahead, so in case you've been meaning to see it, you might just want to keep on the lookout. You have been warned. So, not to waste any time, the movie in question here is actually Jurassic World, a soft reboot of the original Jurassic Park franchise that went on ice back in 2003. Now, I know some might find this a bit surprising, but when looked at independently from its sequels, this movie actually had some very good ideas for how to reboot Jurassic Park in the modern era. And two of the most notable things that makes it more smartly written than other reboots is that it takes ideas and concepts into account that most wouldn't have thought of back when the original came out. Specifically, if dinosaurs were actually brought back to life, how long would it be before the novelty wore off? Because again, few may actually consider it at first, but if scientists really were able to bring extinct animals back from the dead, people wouldn't marvel at such achievements forever. After a while, seeing dinosaurs would be just like seeing any other animal in the zoo, and dare I say, most would eventually get bored with it. Now, while some would forever appreciate and be amazed by the miracle that had been accomplished, it's simply human nature to crave novelty, but become bored with it once it's become too familiar. And the fact that the movie actually addresses this was very clever on the writer's part. Because even if most wouldn't want to admit it, that's probably exactly what would happen. And in a similar vein, the dinosaurs are treated more as the property of the people who own the park rather than like animals. And considering they were created in a lab specifically to entertain the masses and make money, it makes sense that they would end up being viewed as no different than a cartoon or mass-produced toy, instead of animals entitled to basic rights. After all, most corporate executives are not as nice or considerate as John Hammond. And though not touched on as much, that does also bring up the interesting question of just how many rights the dinosaurs do have, and to what extent the company can legally and morally do what they please with them, considering that if it weren't for the scientists that created them, they wouldn't exist in the first place. So how much can they actually be considered the park's property versus their own independent beings? And again, though the movie doesn't dwell on it much, it is still a question that's brought up a couple of times. And those are questions that would have to be asked if such a park were to ever exist. And that's not even getting into the Indominus Rex. Because simply put, both the concepts I just went over, the idea of dinosaurs being brought back and losing their novelty, as well as the question of how many rights they would have, are best explored through the movie's villain, as well as brings another interesting concept into the mix, which is what might happen afterwards if we did actually manage to bring dinosaurs back to life. And there is a distinct possibility that a company might turn to genetic engineering to try and keep interest in dinosaurs and continue making money after the novelty had died off. And this movie shows why that would frankly be a terrible idea. Because even if genetic engineering still has a long way to go before it could actually create something new, it's still advanced quite a lot since the original Jurassic Park. And the movie takes advantage of that to somewhat realistically show how it might be used. And considering just how questionable genetic engineering is now, the movie does the smart thing and portrays it as both unadvisable and just rife for terrible consequences if messed with. To put it all simply, the writers had a lot of forethought when writing this movie, as they didn't just consider what might happen if a theme park centered around dinosaurs actually opened up, but also thought about what might happen afterwards as well, after it's been open and running for a long time. And as I just got through saying, the results actually feel surprisingly true to life in many regards. Though I don't know about the military wanting to replace soldiers with raptors, but I wouldn't put anything past some people. What I'm trying to say here is, this movie actually has a credible leg to stand on when justifying its existence, because it takes both a concept that hadn't been explored in the series before, that being if Jurassic Park were to actually open successfully, as well as advancements in technology to show what the long-term consequences of that success might be. Now, I know some might argue that while the concepts it introduces are good ones, the movie squanders them by basically just rehashing the plot of the first movie all over again. And in many ways, the story is the same, with something at a theme park full of dinosaurs going wrong and causing the animals to escape and terrorize the people at the park. But the thing is, even this can be forgiven because it at least takes the plot in an entirely different direction. Because in the original Jurassic Park, it's clear that John Hammond's ideas are doomed from the start, and as a result, the park has to be abandoned before it ever even opens. And because of that, the park is basically empty and only has a few characters that are ever targeted by the dinosaurs. In Jurassic World, however, the park is fully functional and has a ton of guests staying there, thus allowing it to depict what might have happened in Jurassic Park had Hammond actually gotten the park running before things went south. In other words, Jurassic World rehashing Jurassic Park's basic plot allows the audience to see the kind of destruction the dinosaurs could have caused if such a park were actually inhabited when they escaped. And once again, considering that doesn't really happen in the first movie, it is interesting to see how such a concept might play out. Though obviously this isn't to say that Jurassic World is a perfect reboot or anything like that, because even if it rehashing the plot of Jurassic Park is acceptable for the reasons I just went over, it still copies more from it than it probably should have. And there's also where the movie arguably screws up the most, with that being its characters. Because while even the original Jurassic Park has been criticized for not having very notable characters, that's exactly what helped make the movie as good as it was. Because as a writer myself, I can safely say that sometimes a story simply isn't about the characters, and in those cases they're best used as vessels for what the story is really about. And Steven Spielberg knew that the dinosaurs were the real attraction of the movie and smartly didn't bother pretending otherwise, using the characters more as vessels for both the amazement and terror that the dinosaurs evoke. but I got more into this in my video on the director, which you can find a link in the description too. So the point is, because Spielberg knew the story wasn't about the characters, he uses archetypes more than actual characters, and it suited a story of that nature very well. But, as befitting a director of his caliber, he did still manage to give them distinct personalities and traits. He just did it in a very subtle manner. With Jurassic World, however, the writers try to give each significant character their own subplot or story, and it just doesn't fit the nature of a movie like this too well. Especially because there are so many different characters that are given some kind of subplot. And once again, they really weren't necessary for the characters to work, especially because most of said subplots end up amounting to nothing. Really, the only two characters that work perfectly are Owen, who actually feels like he belongs in a Jurassic Park movie of this nature. Though his dynamic with the Raptors was arguably overemphasized and another weak addition, but the character himself works very well. And Hoskins, because he similarly feels like a suitable villain, even if his motivation isn't the best in the world. And to be fair, some of them do work to a lesser extent, like Claire, whose biggest problem is her trait of being a workaholic, or Marcini, who actually proves to be a very reasonable park owner despite appearing otherwise at first glance. But once again, for the most part, the attempts to add more to the characters weren't needed to tell its intended story, but nonetheless isn't enough to drag down the movie too much either. What I'm trying to say here is, all around, it's actually a pretty clever reboot of the Jurassic Park series, but still obviously not as good as the first one. And that's the point. Unlike most modern reboots, who don't seem to know what they're doing right from the start, Jurassic World actually had a pretty good foundation to start off on. Sure, maybe it does play it a little too safe, or doesn't explore some of the concepts it introduces as much as it could have. But the point is that it could have worked. It could have been the basis for a very successful reboot of the Jurassic Park series. It's just that its sequels flushed all of that potential down the toilet, even if their success at the box office would imply otherwise. But Jurassic World in isolation was really not a bad attempt to revive the franchise, and in many ways was actually pretty smartly written. Again, it's not perfect by any means, but is still a lot better than most modern reboots because the writers actually knew what they were doing, at least to an extent. And again, had the sequels taken the same approach, the results could have been much better. Obviously not perfect, but still something that was more compelling and enjoyable to watch. Something that would have made it stand out as a better attempt at a franchise reboot, rather than just serving as one of countless examples of a revived series gone wrong. At least writing-wise, anyway. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to cover. So now I'd like to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that Jurassic World was actually a pretty good movie and could have worked as a new launching point for the Jurassic Park series if its sequels had taken the same approach? Or do you believe it's simply a mediocre movie and that its subpar sequels were inevitable? Please let me know in the comments below. And please keep in mind that you do not have to agree with any opinions expressed in this video if you don't want to. You can feel however you want to about this or any other topic we discuss here. And if you think I had it all wrong, that is perfectly okay. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.